All right, this is the October 21st, 2019 SIG release meeting for the Kubernetes project. This is a recorded meeting, and we ask everybody to adhere to the Kubernetes code of conduct during the meeting. I think it might be a short meeting. I will drop the meeting notes document in the Zoom chat just for reference for anybody there. If you could add your name to the attendees, that would be awesome. Just check who all was here. So normally on the SIG release meeting, distinct from the release team or the release engineering meeting, we go through our sub-project updates. Licensing is the first one on the list. I'm going to pull up the project board there. I don't know that we have anybody on the call who can speak to anything there. Yeah, the open issues right now. It looks like we don't have anybody on the line who could talk to those. So I'm going to skip that for the day. Release engineering status. So last week we did patch releases of all of the support branches, including the last build for 1.13. And we actually had a couple of issues there. There were, so the normal way the build works is there's a staging process, which is building, and then validation could happen and publication happens from there. And in between staging and publication, the publication step failed due to missing artifacts, and the logging basically didn't show anything that I could see. So this is maybe just to kind of mention it here, and it's maybe more in the context of the release engineering. We've done a lot of talking and brainstorming about how to update the tooling there. We've kind of had this magical tooling that was handed to us historically, and it's mostly worked, but when it fails, it's very opaque. So this is something that hopefully we get better on. Then we additionally, after we did that, we discovered that the release notes were empty. And release notes, there's at least a couple of bugs, it looks like, in the release notes generation. So yet another sign of code that's maybe a little bit stale or bit rotted. I opened up a couple issues there, so hopefully we can get that debugged and resolved on the release notes side at least, because that part is reproducible. I'm not going to walk the release engineering board, I think, because we have the meeting every other week that does that. Is there anything that any of the attendees who are on the 117 release team want to mention about that release status right now? Okay. And Hypercube, we never have an update on, so nothing much to say there. So we often have so much to do that we don't get around to the project board for SIG release. And again, I'm not going to walk the release team's project board because there's a meeting where that happens. I'll briefly show test grid and see if there's anything to talk about there. On master, things are looking generally healthy, which is awesome. Master informing is going to be the more questionable place. Alejandro, is there anything that you want to mention here that's going on currently? If you're talking, we can't hear you. Nothing, okay, nothing you say in the text, okay. So we look to have some networking tests that failed. Yeah, same time, between October 18th and 19th, it looks like networking failures again. So that, I will check after the call and see if it looks like we have bugs open on that. scale is failing recently also. Again, networking mostly, or yeah, networking completely, it looks like. And scale performance. This could be flakes. With the scale testing, it's always hard to know. They're slow running and SIG scalability generally owns them and lets us know when they've decided if there's an issue or not. Windows, that's interesting. That looks like it's been unhealthy forever. Even though Windows support officially GA'd, I feel like it's kind of almost beta feeling. I'm not sure what other people's anecdotal sense of that is. Well, those are the main things then on master. And obviously we don't have a 117 branch just yet. So then that leaves talking about the project board, which we almost never get around to. So in a way, this is maybe good. We have some time to talk about it, that it's a quiet day. All right, so I'm gonna walk through these in order of review, in progress, and to do, and we'll see if we get to the backlog. So need triage automation issue 11818 in test infra. That has been around for a while. I wonder why it might be stalled out. Oh yeah, we've been talking about this forever. So it's just in review. It's been downgraded to priority important soon, but we haven't had activity in about 3 months. I'll have to follow up afterwards on that one and see if I can find any status update on it. So in progress then, we have 18 things that are in progress, which means we probably will use all the remaining time walking through just those. Milestone info on release docs. So it's been put out there. We've got a review. Looks good. Steven has an issue. Is he the assignee? Yes, he is. So that will just be in his hands then, I guess. And he said he was going to be late to the meeting. I don't see him on yet. No. PR template, add a code block to capture primary SIG association. That sounds like something that should be straightforward. Why is it stalled out? We've got comments. Hey Sasha, I see you're on the line and had commented on this one. Anything else to mention on it? It looks like it's maybe coming back around.
Yeah, we just need a confirmation from Steven about this.
Okay. All right then. On another one similarly, but on deprecation notice. Same folks.
Yeah, it's the same.
Same status. Okay. Go 113. Oh boy. Where? Oh, and I actually skipped one. What kind of PRs are good for cherry picks? This is unassigned. I will set a couple of people on this. Set myself. Let's see. Doug M. Deal hack. Let's see, Fleisker and Alexandra. So that is basically the patch release team who handles the cherry picks right now. So having somebody assigned on that might help instead of it sitting there. We obviously haven't walked the board in a while or we would have gotten that assigned. The next one was Go 113. So this has been a bit problematic. What are we, a month and change, a month and a half since 113 came out. We do have a scalability regression that we saw. The expectation was that the fix for that was going to be in the Go releases that came out last week, but those got preempted mostly by a security fix, so I need to go look. I'll check after the meeting and follow up with Jordan and probably Christoph as well to see where that stuff is. At a minimum, hopefully that the scalability regression has been fixed. There's more complicated issues around getting it integrated with us. Looks like folks are working on this, though, in the meantime. All right, the next one, restructure licenses file generation. So this goes back to license subproject status, and Steven's not here. Do we have any of the other folks? I think nobody on the issue is here. Looking at the attendance, no. We've got some comments that need addressed yet on that, and the assignee is probably correct. So that one's another one to ping for status after. Our umbrella on the 116 release retrospective. Can't hurt to glance through this since there are maybe a couple people from the current release team on. And none of these are actually checked off as done, and I think some are. So actually what I want to do, I'm gonna ping Steven for an update because I think he was tracking a few of these. We'll leave that one for after unless anybody knows of anything here that's been completed on this list. I think these around cleaning up the dashboards have mostly been done. Although more recently in the last week or so, we've had conversation about moving some things back into release blocking. And we had discussion about making the publishing bot artifacts release blocking, but I don't know if that got closed on. I've not heard any talk about test infra freeze. Is anybody from the release team aware if that came up yet? It'd probably be sometime soon that we would start talking about that.
Was it about no testing for changes happening after a specific date?
Yeah, yep.
Okay, I haven't heard much about it actually, but I wonder if it's come up because I missed the last release team meeting. I wonder if it comes up there.
Yeah, I haven't been
I'll...
on the last couple myself either, yeah.
Hey, Al, sorry,
Uh-huh.
I had to move to some place where I could actually talk. So a couple of updates on the last three that you mentioned is the cleaning up the SIG release test grid dashboards. Most of it has been done, so I will make a comment in there and point people to the appropriate places. So if anyone's interested, all of you can get background on the issues and the PRs where the conversations happen. The other one that you pointed out, the shul artifacts published by Publishing Bot be release blocking, that was brought up last week during the release engineering meeting, I believe so. but there was no, that was just left for up for conversation. So no, I don't think anything has been done. I don't think anything has been done on that. But if anything, Steven is definitely the person to ask for that one. And the test infra freeze, I actually brought that up. I don't. I think it was a couple of weeks ago with the test with the SIG testing people during their SIG meeting, and it's that one was a definite no, no from their side. The thing that they just to keep it really quick, the issue just for context is that last release we had a lot of problems with all of the tests going red due to a Boscos due to an update on the on Boscos, and they have all the people, all the test infra folks, testing on call, and everyone that works on that. They have been working on making that whole procedure of bumping version for Boscos, Prow, or anything that is related to Prow. They are working on making it more secure by adding better observability, uh, doing updates more frequently, and all those things. But the big issue from their side is for example, the big thing, Prow, and anything really anything related to Prow is not just used for Kubernetes, or is not just used by Kubernetes. And if they actually had a test team for freeze, they will have to freeze. They will essentially have to freeze Prow for a couple of weeks. And during those couple of weeks, the development on Prow is not going to stop again, because people outside of Kubernetes work and contribute to Prow on the daily basis. And you know, it will be kind of an issue. Again, we will be making we could be causing a problem for ourselves, because right now Prow and everything related to Prow is actually, they actually do a version bump every single day. So so during this hypothetical testing for freeze, no updates, nothing will actually be tested for possibly 2 weeks or more, and then they will have to do it again once once the freeze was lifted, and you know, potentially we will be having the same problem that we had with Boscos, which was related to using a Boscos version from three
So
months, 3 months, a really old Boscos version.
Is there
yes,
any discussion about the stability or the release process around Prow? Like, I understand that it's under active development, it's just constantly moving forward, but if
so yeah,
the idea of a freeze is sort of a reactive and on the trailing side, as opposed to proactive, ensuring quality of something that's being consumed or integrated. And as best I see, like Prow, like their test infra doesn't do releases of Prow. It's just commits rolling forward ahead. Or
so yeah, let me jump in here. I'm not sure. Sorry for you know, I apologize for joining later. So this might have already been said, but I think that, you know, what we're trying to do, or what we're trying to see if it's possible, is not so much freeze Proud development. We don't really care to do that specifically. What we want to do is protect the configs of things that are running into the release repos and Kubernetes, right? Basically stuff that lives under config jobs, Kubernetes, and SIG release and release folders, right? Those are the big things that we want to slow down or freeze if we can. So I'm not sure if having a more finer point on those changes or those freezes was discussed, but I don't think that overall we're trying to freeze all of development on Prow for that time.
Yeah, so a really quick note on that. So for example, all the configs that you mentioned, I think that you know, we could potentially work on something like that. But I think originally this testing for freeze was actually brought up because of the Boscos update that was done last release during Go Freeze. And the Boscos update is the that's outside of the any brown configurations that we use for anything related to the release of Kubernetes.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's just a few folders up, right? So, so creating a new, I think bumping a version of, creating a new version of some test infra component is not the same as deciding to bump it for the Kubernetes project, right? As you mentioned, there are a bunch of different projects who leverage PROW, so it's, whether it be, I can only think of one, which is OpenShift, but I know there are a bunch of others that leverage PROW. So yeah, we're not saying stopping development on that or stopping releasing on that stuff. What we're saying is let's not bump things within the Kubernetes configuration during that time, right?
Yes, so at least the response from test infra was that release we can't stop it, so the things are going to keep coming in, and if they actually stop any version bumps during code freeze, then we are going to end up with after 2 weeks we're going to end up with a ton of changes that haven't been tested in any in the Kubernetes community.
But that means that we're
And things may
testing.
break.
We're testing in production then. If they
yeah.
haven't had any testing, that means we're only testing in the official release process. So I dumped a link in the notes to the configuration, and on a daily basis, a robot is updating the version of PROW that we're using. That I think it's reasonable for us to ask, what is the quality control gate on that robot?
So at least based on our conversation, all the quality control is they actually mention a lot of things, and they're still working on adding more alerts whenever something looks goofy. But at least that was part of the process. The fact that they bump to a new version every single day, they can get some really quick signal on whether new changes actually work or not for the things that we are for the things that we are using on Kubernetes, and with testing for freeze. All the changes that were added in the period of potentially 2-3 weeks we're not actually we as in we Kubernetes community we're not going to be we're not going to be using them, and then essentially the same thing that happened with Boscos might happen again.
So I mean, we do have like canary jobs within within the test infra configs. I'm not sure the expanse of those jobs, but like there are mechanisms in place where we try to test version changes to certain things before we roll them out to the wider project. I think what we're saying here is that that has not been done across the project before, I think being a little bit more deliberate about where we roll things out and when. A good example of this is making changes to Kubernetes release and not realizing that it would, and like in the in the failure of rolling those changes in, it would take down test infra jobs for a large part of the project, and we did that with the 1.12.10 release, right? So we have tried to, I've essentially set up a blockade on Kubernetes release on the Kubernetes release repo to so that changes to certain files that can break more than just our jobs need to be vetted by a SIG release admin, right? I don't think that's an unreasonable change, right? Especially if it protects the project. So if we're saying that there needs to be an additional barrier to protect more of the project from test infra changes, like I think I think in totality, like test infra changes are great. I think everyone who's working on test infra is phenomenal, and they're very quick to address any failures in those jobs. But having an additional barrier, having an additional protection for the entire project about how we roll these changes in could be good, right? Maybe this is something that we should be talking about on a wider scale.
And that makes sense. But the big, I guess, the problem statement from the testing side is, what will be a barrier that will improve quality for Kubernetes while not stopping the PRAO life cycle, because PRAO is not PRAO goes beyond Kubernetes, and also a good barrier that is going to allow SIG testing to also have the ability to assure that anything that goes into PRAO is properly tested.
Yeah, so I mean, this kind of goes back to what I said. We probably need to talk about this on a larger scale. What Tim said is true too. We're essentially testing in prod. When you roll out a change for the entire project, you're testing in prod, right? And that's good and bad. We do get that quick signal, but we also fall into the mode of we have to activate test infra on call, right? And that's a very small amount of people. We have to activate anyone who is working, who could be affected by the release, and that's multiple people on the release team, right? So it's not just like, yes, it's good to get great signal and all that stuff, but it's also like, let's make sure that we're looking at work-life balance as we do this stuff.
I think the freeze is like, there are benefits to testing in production, and there's always going to be some aspect of what you do that is testing in production, unless you're on an extremely formal system. So the benefit then is recognizing that that happens and understanding how to plan and react to it appropriately. But if we're solely testing in production, that's kind of scary. And that we had a notable failure in the last release cycle. I mean, it's extreme maybe for us to react by saying, oh, let's just do a test infra freeze. But this has been a repeated pattern. And we have other things where we have sort of phasing of the rigor that goes into things. We're trying to keep the project moving fast most of the time, but at other times dial things back, because we recognize that there's a lot of uncontrolled variables or minimally controlled variables, and that you have that always present aspect of escapes. Your test cases never are production. So there's going to always be things we miss.
Yeah, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for this or figure out how to walk through this. Like you said, we do have these gates in place, especially on the release side, to make sure that we're, whether it's doing a release without the no mock flag and stuff like that, to get to a point where we get the signal of what we're about to do before we do it. I think the problem that I probably have with this is when we hit late stage release and we're late stage in the release cycle, and we have to contend with this stuff, right? I think it would be unfair to not recognize that everyone isn't a master of test infra, and even the people who work on test infra have not seen all of the hidey holes that are involved in the way the machine is put together, right? So when you have a failure, when you take CI signal or bug triage, people opening up failures around just CI events, right? Not realizing that there is an underlying component that is causing this, right? That burns a lot of time. I think with the Bosca's failures, we lost, was it close to a week? It was definitely a few days, but it was close to a week in terms of vetting it exactly what it was, and then turning it around and rolling it back. Right.
Well, we just a few minutes ago, we did a brief run of test grid, and there was a lot of flakiness there. I think we all recognize that our CI has flakes, so it's almost become a standard practice to, oh, I'll just retest, or oh, I'll give it a day or two and see. So if we're claiming that we're really just trying to be focused on agility and speed, yet anytime there's an issue, we give it a day or two, more things go by, that obscures what the underlying issue might have been, if there is one. Like so walking the board, there were some networking issues that seemed to have cropped up on Friday or so. Now granted, that's over the weekend. Need to go look and see whether that's been observed as being triaged, what merged around that time, that type of thing. But we also have a lot of flakes, and things can go days before people decide, oh wait, maybe that wasn't a flake. and all of this slows us down.
Yeah, definitely agree. And I feel that again, none of us are masters of test infra, but as we move more and more of our processes into CNCF sponsored infrastructure, right? We have to be incredibly cautious about cost, right? We have to be very, very concerned with that stuff. And the defaulting to, I think, as a community, there are some, I think the default is to like, let me retest this thing, right? Let me retest this thing, especially because like that's what the PRs tell you to do. They tell you like this thing failed, go look at it and then retest it, right? If we have built the collective thought that this is just a flake, let me rerun it, like that costs someone money, right?
And I think the cost is pretty significant. When I mean, looking at the PRs I'm touching going by, on average, nothing goes through on the first time. It feels like. I mean, those are just anecdotally the ones I see. Maybe I'm horribly lucky. I don't know.
Yeah, and I spend a lot of my time on lower touch PRs. I spend less of my time in the Kubernetes repo. I spend more of my time on like Kubernetes release or SIG release or the enhancements or cluster API Azure, right? Where the tests are going to be cheaper, right? But in Kubernetes, we're running scalability tests on these things too, right? And it's I think it's something that we need to consider. We need to make sure that the overall the global knowledge for the project is not necessarily always to retest, right? It's to do some sort of vetting of what's happening behind the scenes, or help people better read the tea leaves that are a job failure, right? Even if you are familiar with what could be happening, like reading the logs, they're sometimes hard.
Very.
Yeah, and that's not something we can necessarily expect a new contributor to do efficiently, right? If you're doing, you've got this is your first PR to Kubernetes and you have no idea why it's failing, right? Seeing, it's giving you instructions to do something that costs money, right? So there are a bunch of different things at play, right? How can we be better about deflaking? How can we make sure that the changes that were happening on the release side and on the test infra side are jump through more hoops to be vetted before rolling out to quote unquote production, right? There are a few places that we need to attack. I'm just saying that I think that figuring out how to build a system or incorporate changes into the current system about testing slower or testing in different venues first would be valuable as a conversation.
So, I mean, I completely, all the things that you all mentioned, they are absolutely important. But just to refocus the conversation on the regional things. So the other things that I feel the other really a couple aspects that matter in this thing is that, for example, the Bosco's issue, that was so for example, that failure. It was actually a manual. It wasn't. It was actually something that people from testing, they manually did, because they figured that there was going to be no issue if Boscos was updated. So that update did not follow the normal the daily prow version bump. And the other thing is that they definitely they do have some walls. They do have a lot of testing. I'll be lying to you if I just started listing if I just try to list it out, because there are a couple things I don't work in there every single day. So but they do have the canaries. They have multiple other things to work. Also, also at least specifically related to Boscos, one of the other things, at least Boscos development was trailing behind the rest of Pro development. So one of the action items that they have for this release or the near future is to actually add alerts for for 500s and 400s, which was the issue that we run into the during the last release. But overall, they do a lot of work with canary deployments and their alerting system and all that. The other thing is Holt's team, Steven, since we are and everyone that might be interested, I can since this is a SIG release meeting, I can share with you all the links in Slack where we had some of the conversation of what things can be done, what things are not really feasible, and all that. We can pick that conversation again. And also, the last thing that I want to mention is that if anyone is interested in talking more about this, SIG testing is going to have a meeting. They have their bi-weekly meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m. US Pacific.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, like, this is definitely, like, we're not trying to boil the ocean or cast blame or anything like that. We just want to make sure that, like, we can. It's hard stuff. It's hard stuff, and as you know, as you were mentioning, like, if people on this call are interested in contributing to Test Infra, I think it's one of the many it's one of the many lesser thanked jobs. I'm not going to say thankless, but lesser thanked jobs. It's plumbing for the project. It's incredibly valuable. It helps people. You know, there are little magic gremlins that are behind this project that make the things go, and we can always use more hands there. So if that's something that you're interested in, let's get people directed in that area. Definitely deflaking our tests is important to us as SIG Release. The quality and consistency of the merges that go into Kubernetes are important to us. The stuff that goes into SIG Release and the release repos, that's important to us. But as a project, Test Infra is huge, right?
So on that front, let's go back to see if we can get through a little bit more of the stuff on the board. We had been on issue 806, Stephen.
Okay.
And that one, none of the items have been checked off, but I'm pretty sure quite a few of them have at least had significant progress. So we could use an update on that issue from you in the issue.
SpaghettiOs. Let's 806. Right. 806 and SIG Release.
And SIG Release, yeah, 806, yeah. And since we have that, I'm going to go back to the project board. We're in the in progress column. Questions around charter scope specifics. I was looking at this one last week. We can discuss that offline. I think it's been around for a while. I think it's basically ready to close, probably.
Yeah, it was, well, not ready yet. I have to issue an update to the charter, but we were not able to, these were questions that we weren't able to answer before when Aaron opened this issue, because the release engineering project the sub-project did not exist, right? And we did not start on this, like, massive adventure that we've had over the last few cycles to do investigation into some of these processes. So I think that now that we have, we're actually in good shape to update the charter.
And I think this is mostly just removing these two lines from the steering charter. That they'd wanted to know that we were actively owning it, and we've spun up a sub-project, so I feel like we're covered there.
Yeah, okay. I can work on this. Cool.
So the next one, update all active Kubernetes release branches to latest Go. This isn't
issues like this.
Yeah, this is an umbrella issue that will basically always be open. So we'd also had the Go 113 specific one. I'm gonna follow up on that afterwards, and I'll see if maybe on this one we can. Well, there's two aspects to it. One, it's an umbrella. It will always be open because there's always going to be some new Go coming out. But there is process definition that needs to happen. There are some better decision on how we move to new Goes and trying to not fall out of support relative to Go as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think once we have a process doc, this is something that we can. We also have a team of we have an undefined team of people who get involved in in doing Go bumps. So it's like
Yep.
it's Liggett, it's Christoph,
Christoph.
Ben, Dims, right? You know, you've got a bunch of people who jump in and kind of inherently know the things to do and the places to poke and what images need to be bumped where and all that
So
stuff.
that's a kind cleanup, kind documentation for that reason.
Yeah.
All right, then the next one, add a kind test category for release milestone PRs. I don't remember this one. This has been around forever.
Yeah. So I know there was some back and forth about what to do with test, right? Kind. So I don't think that we should specify test as a kind, right? I think there already is an area test, right? Area test plus the area that it actually involves. So whether it's area test and plus the SIG release label, or area test plus area provider Azure or something like that, right? Gives you an idea of where the test is focused. But I kind of disagree with the idea of just having a test label. Just having a kind test label. And then I say I'm in favor of it on the end. Amazing. Past me.
I do think that there is some rationale for at least documenting. So without going and looking at the specific PRs that people have referenced there, from whether we're talking about freezing test infra or the patch release criteria for cherry picks, there's a number of places where if we had a way of better identifying things that are kind of test only changes that are improving, that aren't maybe changing the underlying infrastructure, but are improving a test so that we get better signal, and that they're not going to impact code functionality, the risk of taking in the patch at the times where we're maybe more sensitive to changes. Those may be things that are safer, but I also don't see this as a necessarily requiring a kind label. Like these labels help us triage things, and like Aaron says, we have so many of them that it can be overwhelming. And all it takes is noting, like you've got a discussion flow in a PR to say like, hey, we're trying to merge this now, regardless of when now is, in this context, regardless of what the context is, but spell it out because this improves test signal. I think that when reviewers see that, they can have a discussion about the merits and risks and make a decision. But to think that there would be some blanket like, oh, this is a test only fix, we will merge it, or not somehow, I don't see that being so cut in stone that the kind label actually yields much there.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I do want to figure out how we can start to integrate that kind dog emoji into our day-to-day workflow, though. We should take that as a critical urgent. Yeah, and this is also something that looks like it could probably be. I think you might need kind dog the emoji for that to work.
Oh yeah, and I don't know the exact character for that, so I'm just gonna have to copy paste.
Let's see if it works.
Really quick question. I don't know if this has been mentioned in the issue, but what will be the difference between kind test and area test?
So, So kinds refer to the type of PR that something is, right? And it's fairly quote unquote easy to try to categorize what a PR is, cleanup, documentation, bug, failing test, what have you, right? It gets trickier when you know, in a perfect world, we write perfect tests and we include those tests when we make code changes, right? In that sense, what's great about the owner's files is that you can automatically tag something as depending on where it is, the area, right? So areas are areas or SIG labels or subproject labels refer to specific pieces of code, right? So, you know, it gets harder to leverage, you know, if we have a test folder, right? You can label that test folder as area test, right? As opposed to, like, you're not necessarily going to label it as kind test because maybe what you're doing is kind cleanup or kind documentation of that, you know, of that folder, right? So it gets a little trickier to categorize what you're doing depending on what you touch, right? The person who opens the PR, the person who triages the PR or reviews it, the PR issue needs to be able to categorize that stuff. And I think we all have different definitions of what that stuff could be, right? So yeah, I'm not sure that kind is appropriate here. But I want to see if I can maybe, come on, kind dog emoji. No. I want to see if I can maybe take the screen for a bit. This is totally not related to kind stuff, but I've been working on something and I kind of wanted to show it off. I probably should have put it on the agenda, but there are 12 minutes left and I want to show y'all some stuff. In the spirit of Stephen was hacking on a thing, and let's have him walk through it quickly on the video. George, oh, okay. All right. Was it a wave or okay, it's all right, sweet. Live demo. And I'm gonna see how quickly I can do some of this stuff. All right, so I have been working on a few different PRs. And what a queue. This and this, right? So a few different PRs. Building, yeah, all right. So how can I chain this together properly? All right, so GCB builds, right? So we have in test infra, there is within the images builder folder, there is basically definitions, Docker file, some entry point script, the cloud build file, and Docker file. Did I say Docker file? Probably. That define basically a tool to that is sugar around around the GCB, the G Cloud build submit command, right? And what we've essentially done is what I did there is kind of tweaked a few of the things that allow us to arbitrarily build from random directories, right? So this tool, I'll show it to you. I think I have enough time to show it to you. So walking through the changes really quickly, added some new flags, a build directory flag, and updated the README. Basically, so if you've ever seen like the variants.yaml file, basically what it allows you to do is supply a set of different configurations for the way you might build an image, right? Or the way you might submit it's more accurate to say submitting a Google Cloud build run, right? And the reason for that is I kind of tweaked this to be agnostic of images because I realize that it's generally useful to us as SIG release. So we have kind of 3 processes that we run through. One that is not day-to-day affected by a human, which is the build stage, right? So if you so the build stage, Kubernetes builds, right? But more specifically here, right? And nope, right? So, oh, that's too big. Right. So in test infra, we have a periodic defined. We have 2 periodics defined, right? One that runs every 5 minutes, one that runs every hour. CI Kubernetes build. This is actually what builds. This is what builds Kubernetes, right? It's kind of in the in the name. And essentially, it will dump. It will build all the artifacts for Kubernetes and most of the artifacts, excuse me, the tarballs and all that good stuff, and land it in and if there are images, we're pushing images to GCRIO Kubernetes CI images. And basically what it does is it uses the bootstrap image, which has been deprecated for 1,000 years now, and checks out the Kubernetes repo, the release repo, uses this as the source, and then runs this scenario, right? This Kubernetes build scenario, right? What I wanted to do was I created something called shadow builds. So what I wanted to do is mirror that process and essentially see what it would look like for us to push to a new GCP project, right? So that being the Kate staging release test, which is going to be the project that we're using moving forward for. So this is the CNCF GCP project that release will be using, right? So what I wanted to see is if I could start teasing out some of the errors that would pop up, right? Whether they be permission errors, whether misconfigurations of tests, things that we had made assumptions about that were not actually true or no longer true when you move from project to project, so that we could have kind of like a shadow build in the process in the background, seeding, basically seeding information for us as we're starting to test different things like building debs and RPMs, right? Can't really do that unless the artifacts that you need to have are in the places that you need to have them to test that flow, right? So that's kind of the purpose of these jobs. And what I wanted to do was kind of just set this up like here. What ended up happening is that I'm starting to look at essentially rewriting the job in a way that does not require the bootstrap, the bootstrap image, right? And what I found was that it was it kind of made sense to use what we're calling the image builder image as just a generic GCB builder, right? So what's really cool about it is we can, that variants file that I mentioned, you can start to configure something that looks close to the different variants that we have for building the project, whether it's build fast, or it's like make quick release, so on and so forth, right? And kind of configure things as you see fit, but also, you know, what's great about it is it gives you the opportunity to not depend on kind of understanding everything that's happening in test infra. Because if you look at this test, you don't, like, you get a vague idea of here, scenario Kubernetes build, what does that mean? Where do I find that, right? And the answer is there is a scenarios folder in test infra that has a bunch of scenarios, right? And one of the scenarios is Kubernetes build. If you go into Kubernetes build, you see that it's eventually running main with some arguments, and this is main, does a few things in terms of getting environment variables, and then eventually runs a make clean. If you've specified the fast flag, it will do a make quick release. If not, it'll do a make release, and then it will run the push build script, right? With the arguments that you've configured here, right? So this is not easy to understand. It's incredibly difficult. I remember the first time I figured it out. It's incredibly difficult to understand without some context, right? But if you take a look at this PR, right? Adding support for Kubernetes builds via Google Cloud Build, this starts to make it a little clearer about what's happening, right? So this is a build file that lives within our repo that we control under our owners files and all that good stuff, right? It's using the Git Cloud Builder. It's going to this directory. It's doing a clone of a Kubernetes repo and a branch that you can specify. Then it's doing a clone of the release tools repo. So essentially, those are two of the things that test was doing, right? And then make clean, make release type, and then finally the push build, right? So basically, being able to templatize this stuff and then being able to very clearly see what's happening in these substitutions, right? So I'm doing release in a container, and then we take a look at the variants, and the variants are kind of cool because you can see. All right, we're doing, if I say build CI, we're going to build it in CI, we're going to do a no mock. This is the bucket I'm going to use. This is the registry I want to use. I'm going to allow duplicate version marker files. I'm going to use this as my extra publish file. So it will write a Kate's master.txt when the build is done. And I'm also going to build Hypercube, right? So, and then this is kind of my test doodad here, which I think should work, maybe. I don't know. Let's try it out, right? And then also a new Docker file that's based on the kubectl version 1. This is the Go version, right? So we just bumped to 112, so this is bumped to 112 here, and then it adds a few more things. This Docker file will get cleaned up, but it adds a few more things to essentially enable using gcloud within the image if we need to, as well as adding Docker for images that need to do Docker build and then a Docker push, right? So seeing this in action, where's my little scratch pad? All right, right. So there is an image. Where? All right. Right. So what this is doing is that I'm going to use this builder image that's already been built. Project is Kubernetes release test. The scratch bucket is Kubernetes release test GCB. I'm not going to upload any source to GCB. Using this as a variant. So this variant that I specified, again, is here, right? So this is how my job is going to be configured. It's going to do a set of substitutions across this job before before sending it to GCP. And this might fail because I added some new things and the buckets are different, but we're going to try it anyway. We'll see what happens, right? And then also it's saying that the GCP config file is going to be build.yaml instead of cloud build.yaml. The reason this is important is because we have, if we see reveal and sidebar, we've got a release.yaml as well as a staging, right? And these are the ones that we've been using for like GCP manager. And you can see it's kind of templated a similar way, but with 1 minute left, let's kick that off and see what happens, right? We can see that the logs are available here. And stuff is happening, maybe. All right, so it takes a little bit because we're using a high CPU 32, which means, I forgot what the, and anyway, when you use a different machine type on, when you use a specific machine type on Google Cloud Build, it takes a little longer to get started to grab that machine. So that's happening right now, and that will probably eat into the rest of my demo time. Anyhow, but essentially what I want to do is kind of tie all of these things together, right? One, modify the current builder that we have today to support agnostic Google Cloud builds, not builds that are necessarily going to end in an image push, right? So that this PR does that. And then use that to, yes, Tim, we're at time. So then use that to do the Kubernetes build process, right? And then wire that into test infra, right? So you can view all of these PRs. I will need reviews on this one super soon. So anyone who wants to do that can do that. Our demo is kicking off. If anyone has access to this link, they can go check out what the build will look like at the end of it. But maybe I'll continue that in a different meeting.